Hello and welcome to this exclusive webinar hosted by PV Insider and organised by MESIA, the Middle East Solar Industry Association. My name is Jack Ahern and I am the Head of Strategy and Development at PV Insider. It is my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today's webinar, Simon Stevens. Simon is an associate at Chadbourne and Park based in their Dubai office, and he focuses on project finance and finance matters. For 9 years, Simon has advised both sponsors and lenders to energy infrastructure projects, focusing on both renewable and conventional power generation. Simon has experience advising on solar, wind, geothermal and nuclear projects, as well as other types of conventional power and infrastructure. He has worked across the Middle East and the United States, where he practiced from Chadbourne's Washington, D.C. office. Simon also serves as the legal director and member of the board of directors at the Middle East Solar Industry Association, who have kindly organised today's webinar. So now I'd like to pass over to Simon, who will moderate today's proceedings and introduce our remaining panelists. Simon, over to you.
That's great. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. And I'd like to welcome all of our audience here. Thank you very much for joining us on this webinar. We have a great panel today to discuss a very important country in this region, which is Jordan. This country, as you know, has been extremely important in the solar industry. Very central to many of our participants here, and to explain some of the exciting prospects for this country, we have a distinguished panel. Shukri Halibi is a founding board member of IDAMA. That's a Jordanian not-for-profit private sector business association focusing on the sustainability of Jordan's energy, water, and environmental sector. He's the Chief Operating Officer of Mustaqbel Cleantech, one of the leading PV installers in Jordan. It's installed over 2.5 megawatts of PV projects since the net metering regulations in Jordan have taken effect, and that was in 2013. Shukri has been working in the solar field since 2008 and has contributed to the development of the solar industry project in Jordan and throughout the region. Also joining us this afternoon is Hannah Zaghloul. He's the Chief Executive Officer of Kawa Energy, which is an eco-friendly project development company. Zaghloul is also a founding and board member of IDAMA's Initiative and Business Association, Jordan's blueprint for a green economy. At Kawa Energy, Hannah leads several projects in renewable energy, including Shamsman, a 50-megawatt photovoltaic solar energy project located in the southern part of Jordan. He's particularly interested in Shamsi, also a community-scale distributable renewable energy project enticing households to become clean energy producers, while also making use of smart grid technologies and becoming energy efficient. Our third panel member, who is, I'm hoping to be able to join, although he's having a couple of technical issues, is Enis Rimawi. He's the Managing Director of Catalyst Private Equity and Chairman of Millennium Energy Industries, NEI Solar. Catalyst Private Equity is a regional energy and water sector product and technology-focused private equity firm. It's also, very interestingly, one of the developers of a 23-megawatt solar PV project in round one of Jordan's direct bid process. We'll obviously be hearing a little bit more about round one of Jordan's direct bid process, as well as round two, which is starting to get underway, and also the prospect for future rounds. But first, we're going to have a brief background on the country of Jordan and its solar industry from Shukri. So Shukri, if you wouldn't mind, please. Thank you.
Thank you for the kind introduction, Simon, and good morning and good afternoon to all the listeners today. I'd like to give a brief introduction first to IDAMA, which is, as stated, the private sector organization that was founded 4 years ago with the aim of developing Jordan's water, energy, and environmental sectors. We see Jordan facing quite a few challenges in those areas that have not only been exacerbated by the lack of gas supplies from Egypt over the past few years, but we're also one of the poorest water countries in the world. and water and energy are clearly very much interrelated, and we certainly are trying to do our part as private sector companies, about 70 members, to advocate change in regulation. So we were playing a key role in advocating for the Renewable Energy and Efficiency Law and the bylaws that followed. And we take we play a role in training and capacity building, in business development and networking, and also in public awareness. What I'd like to start our introduction today with just the success factors for solar in Jordan. I think Jordan's been fortunate to be a leader in many respects in the Arab world in terms of pushing along the regulations. And I think what we have going for it is, compared to the GCC countries, for example, is higher solar radiation due to better weather conditions. We do have quite a bit of land and roof areas that we'd like to take advantage of. We are a smaller country in terms of our grid is at peak about 3.5 gigawatts in the coming few years. So we do have some grid capacity issues, although Round 1 has been able to take up to 210 megawatts of solar by 2015. Certainly we're looking at, Jordan's looking at hosting a number of different types of technologies, whether it's tracking or different module suppliers, and I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned in the future in terms of also the capacity of our engineering companies and our contracting companies and our developers locally. And there are some financing products that we'll be discussing today, as well as I'll provide a quick overview of the regulatory environment in Jordan. And certainly what helps the solar industry in Jordan, and what has driven Jordan to open up, has been the increase in cost of production due to use of heavy fuel oil, and certainly the government's announcement to have increases in electricity prices to the consumers in the next 5 years. So that also helps drive the solar industry. Jordan's primarily concern is that we rely 97% of our energy sector is imported, and that causes a significant deficit on our national electricity production company, NEPCO, which by the end of this year is in significant deficit, and the cost of production is about 15 Jordanian cents per kilowatt hour. That comes to about 16 or 17 euro cents per kilowatt hour. So it is a handsome price to be paying for the government-owned company, NEPCO. And the consumers, and depending on the segment, each pay a different tariff, and that's how the sector is structured in Jordan. We have different tariffs for different segments of the market. And at the moment, the only sectors that are subsidized, remain to be subsidized, are primarily the residential and the industrial and the water pumping sectors. So other segments are not subsidized, and primarily the commercial, the hospitality, and the public buildings are not subsidized. And those provide an opportunity for net metering with good payback periods on solar photovoltaic projects. Jordan's put an ambitious target of attaining 20% of its renewable energy mix by 2020 from solar, wind, and waste. Solar has been the most aggressive to proceed, primarily because the wind capacity, the grid capacity is not quite there for wind, which requires a lot of reserve capacity for conventional energy. So the first round of 2015 will see about 210 of IPPs proceeding, as well as year to date we've got about 10 or so megawatts that have already been implemented on the net metering scheme. The law was enacted in 2012, and we have several windows of opportunities for reducing electricity prices, both to government and the private sector. The first is net metering, where you can do that on-site. And the other one is off-site, which we call wheeling, which allows any consumer to offset up to 100% of their energy requirements or electricity requirements by locating in another location and using the medium and low voltage, or the medium and high voltage connections, and as well as low voltage for reducing electricity costs. And this has been successful in specific segments of the market. The direct proposal was kicked off in 2012, if I'm not mistaken, and the first round are currently doing financial closure as we speak. Round 2 bidders are submitting the end of this year for about 4 projects, each of 50 megawatts in the north and eastern part of Jordan, primarily due to the capacity constraints on the grid in the south. And round 3 has been indefinitely postponed. There are customs and sales tax exemptions for this sector, so that's very helpful for our integrators and our installers. And finally, there's other opportunities in solar, whether it's thermal or off-grid opportunities that people are pursuing. This is a very high-level, obviously, picture of the grid in Jordan. Most of the projects are occurring in the south. In addition to the IPPs, there are several EPC opportunities that I forgot to mention. Primarily on the wind and the solar, about 60 megawatts of wind and 60 megawatts of solar that have been tendered last year by the government, and that's proceeding as well. Those present opportunities for the solar industry. The government and the Central Bank of Jordan have provided a specific facility for solar projects, an industrial loan, which is at low encouraged interest rates and prolonged periods of repayment. In addition to that, most of the multilateral banks have stepped up to support the developers in round 1, primarily because of the insufficient capacity of local banks to carry such large investments, and also the inexperience of banks in the renewable energy sector. The French Development Agency has also cooperated with several banks in Jordan to provide facilities with a rebate of 5% provided by the EU. And the government has also structured a fund which aims to facilitate the financing and development of renewable energy projects, primarily where subsidies prevent real market economics from developing projects. And in the retail segment, there are also a few products out there. In general, our outlook is bullish for the solar industry in Jordan, although we are concerned that 3-4 years down the line, we will hit some constraints in terms of grid capacity, and we'll start to look outside of Jordan. There are going to be a lot of lessons learned in the coming few years, particularly in relation to round 1 and the future rounds. And we're looking forward to the government ramping up its spending on reducing its own electricity consumption in public agencies. And certainly we're looking forward to new technologies being adopted from Europe in the area of storage, electric vehicles. So we hope to be a pioneer in the development of the solar industry in Jordan and also in the region. So this in a sense concludes my brief introduction.
Hannah, thank you very much. That was a very good broad overview. Obviously, we'll be revisiting many of the topics that you touched on there, and I think that was an excellent roadmap for us. Hannah, I want to turn to you for a second just to expand on one of the points. Obviously, as we discussed just a few moments ago, a lot of the focus has been on utility scale projects. These particularly have been the independent power projects. Round 1, and then round 2, and round 3 we are looking for in the future. Just as background, of course, I think it's worth mentioning that it is not as if the independent power sector began with round 1 of the direct bid process. There have been successful IPP projects in Jordan. So as an example, there is the Tafila wind farm, which is a large wind farm that in some respects has acted as a little bit of a template for the direct bid process that's now taking place and is well and truly underway in the solar sector. But Hannah, I think it's worth also mentioning the exciting other opportunities in solar that have taken place in Jordan that Shukri touched on. And I was wondering if you could just walk us through the different levels, not just utility scale, but going to smaller applications all the way down to the residential level. I was wondering if you could just give us a brief overview of the kinds of projects you're seeing in the marketplace.
Okay. Thank you very much, Simon. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining. Frankly, The utility scale is very important to Jordan to start with, and that's why we initiated a utility scale in the beginning. But at the same time, we were looking also for the distributed energy, where we can have, where homeowners or residential, they can use PV panels to generate their own electricity and consume it at the same place. And that's probably more efficient for the grid, and it will help the distribution company at the end of the day, and also Jordan in total. But also with the prices of electricity going up, this created a lot of opportunities, not just for the homeowners or large homeowners, but also for the commercial, such as hospitals, banks, telecom operators, universities, schools, and they consume a lot of electricity, and electricity prices going up, so they need to find a way of how they can reduce that cost. And believe it or not, solar photovoltaic is been picking up. I think Shukri mentioned that so far around or probably towards the end of this year, around 15 mega, from 10 to 15 mega watt is going to be installed in Jordan. And there is a lot of players in this market. As far as I remember, when we started in 2008, probably we were 2 or 3 companies. Today, you're talking about 400 companies, something like that. They are dealing with photovoltaic. And there's a lot of installers in the market and trying to catch on this. We see a growth in this market probably for the next 3, 4 years, 5 years, depending on if there's any enhancement on the grid or the distribution grid in this case, or the enhancement also on the in the conventional generation, in order to be able to absorb the fluctuation in energy that might be created because of so much large distribution. This is a great opportunity to invest in, but also, it depends on which type of scale you want to go into this market. We see a market for 50K, and we see a market also for a couple of megas there, and that the couple of megas market is growing, and I think it starts to catch up toward the middle of next year, especially when we have a clearer view on the wheeling and being able to execute the wheeling instruction properly. I think this should cover this on the distribution.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Just to get to one aspect of that, let's go back to, well, this could actually be at a variety of different ranges. We've had a question come from a member of the audience about what are the opportunities available to a foreign investor that's looking at Jordan as a place to invest in, either as a cash investor or potentially as a co-developer. Enes, you run a private equity fund and you have a project that's being developed as part of round 1 right now. So I'd like to ask you, what drew you to Jordan, and what are the key elements that you think are important for a foreign investor considering investing in Jordan?
Sure. We're Catalyst Private Equity is based in Jordan, and one of our primary portfolio companies, Millennium Energy Industries, is a solar solutions company based in Jordan. So in general, Jordan is very transparent and open in terms of foreign investors. So you can have a 100% owned foreign company established in Jordan. The registration process is pretty quick and efficient. There are no issues in repatriation of capital. So the opportunity for an international investor to come to Jordan for work in Jordan, or even coming to Jordan as a hub for work regionally, is available. And we've done this. I mean, most of our work, let's say, for Millennium Energy Industries is actually, which is Jordan based, is actually in the UAE and Saudi Arabia, and even in Chile and other locations. So So we've successfully seen Jordan being used as a regional or international hub, especially due to the openness, and two, the fact that you have very cost-effective talent in Jordan on the engineering and the analysis side. So simply put, I mean, for any investor, I saw the question that wants to get involved in PV in Jordan, they can, if they're interested in government projects, everything's available on the government website. It's in English, expressions of interest, RFPs, etc. Certainly a visit locally. There's the Jordan Investment Board. There's IDAMA, which can also help facilitate. This is the Renewable Association. Introductions to various players. So it's a very open environment. It's had to become open just because at the end of the day, it's not a very wealthy country, so its edge has to be its openness and its people, the education level of its people. So we're happy to be based here, and we're basing our private equity management activities out of here. And for our portfolio company in Solar Solutions, it's tackling the regional market with a Jordan base for back office engineering, management, etc.
Great, thank you very much. I'd like to continue on the same theme with a question for Shukri, which is related to round 3 of the solar the direct bid process, but related in this question of transparency and certainty for investments. Now, round 3 was announced with some fanfare. At the time it was announced, round 2 was just beginning. And then round 3 was announced as a larger project in terms of individual project size, but not necessarily larger in terms of overall megawatt size. As you said in your initial presentation, it's been placed on indefinite hold. Is there a message there or a takeaway that potential investors should think about, or is it just part of the usual process of developing a power sector in a country that is balancing loads and balancing demands, as any other country does?
I think in some cases Jordan puts the cart in front of the horse, and in this case that may have been what happened, primarily because the grid was not ready. And the decision to do that was primarily because the government thought that it should reconsider its procurement strategy, either the size of the projects or the need to first secure the grid capacity. So I understand that the government is currently trying to secure a grant for about $300 million to enable what they call the Green Corridor, and also to perhaps have a different procurement strategy where a large sum of, let's say, a gigawatt is procured. Now, of course, as a Jordanian and also as a sector, we want to see transparency in any future transactions, and we'd rather have a much more flexible IPP structure. And we'd like to be able to encourage local investment in these projects in an open and transparent manner with international developers. And this will open a lot of opportunities, certainly, for Jordan. It's still uncertain as to how they will go about it. But it's clear that the grid capacity issues and the need for more careful planning is needed before we announce round 3.
Excellent. Hannah, if I could ask you this question. I think one of the big success stories in Jordan has been the tariff available in Jordan. And again, this is on this theme of certainty and a friendly environment for investment, whether that's Jordanian domestic investment or whether it's foreign investment. But I was wondering if you could give people who may not be familiar with the tariff as it's available in Jordan a little bit more detail on what is available there. And I think this is also not necessarily just at the utility scale, but again, also thinking about the other scales that are available as opportunities in the solar sector in Jordan. So perhaps if you could just tell us a little bit more detail about the tariff and in particular what conditions apply.
Currently at this stage, the tariff initially, when the government issued it for utility scale on solar, it was 120 fils, that's around 17 cents per kilowatt hour. Then this year, they dropped it to 100 fils, which is that's 14 cents per kilowatt. So the next round they're going to be competing against this tariff. So you need to come even below this tariff. But for the net metering, it stands at 120 fils, which is the 17 cents per kilowatt hour. And this is encouraging, the net metering, although the law on the net metering or the instruction does not allow you to generate more than what you have already established as consumption of your last year consumption. So normally you need to install as much as you can as you have been consuming more, so there's no excess. But if there's an excess, there's going to be a consolidation, and you might end up getting some money out of that. But I think this is this would be very rare to happen. So the 100 fils today for the utility scale is still attractive, but because it's going to be a huge competition on the second round, we do expect a lot of people they're going to go below that number. But you need to keep in mind that Jordan's strategy, Jordan embarked on a strategy of diversifying its energy resources or electricity where they can generate the electricity. So today you'll find the government already signed an agreement with an oil shale direct burning at a very aggressive tariff. If I can remember correctly, I think it's around 90 fils, which comes to around 12 cents. And also they are talking to Noble to buy gas, probably around, if I'm not mistaken, around $6 per 1 million BTU, and this probably at the end of the day will get you to generate electricity in the range of between 8 and 10 cents per kilowatt hour. So that would not happen probably before 2018. But this just gives you an indication that this might put more pressure on the tariff for solar or even wind at that time. And with today, I think the tariff stands at 80 fils, and that comes to around 11 cents. So when he needs to look at the tariff, he needs to look at the mix of energy that Jordan is embarking on, and to have that into consideration.
That's very helpful. Thanks very much. We're getting some great questions coming from the audience here, so I'd like to turn to some of those. Perhaps, let me see. Enes, maybe you might like to help us get your view on this one. There's been a delay in round 2 with some of the projects, delayed twice now from June to September and then to December 2014. Now we've just heard that the strategy in Jordan is certainly evolving. But I was wondering if you could give us your views on that. Is that something that anyone should be concerned about, or is it just, again, part of the usual give and take as an energy strategy is developed?
Thanks, Simon, for the question. I think the first delay was primarily at the request of developers. Developers basically wanted more time, and that's why it was moved from June to September. So it was actually the government being responsive to developer requests. The delay to December may have been further developer requests, may have been the government wanting to see the outcome and the financial closes related to round 1. I think, as Shukri mentioned earlier, the government started moving in parallel very quickly because of the need, the inherent need locally for PV. This is not being done for environmental purposes. It's not being done for necessarily even strategic purposes. It's being done to reduce the energy deficit for the government. It's a cost-saving measure. So, so I think that the government moved quickly to announce round 2 and very quickly to announce round 3, and then realized that perhaps it should monitor the progress of round 1 before proposals are submitted for round 2. So I don't see that delay on round 2 as an issue. We've seen the government in many cases where there's been consideration in changing direction. It's only been done so within the context of not deterring investor interest or backing out on already announced commitments. So it's positive that round 2 continues to move forward with a December deadline. It's understandable that round 3 has been put on hold or canceled till the government has a clearer view of the medium term. So we actually think it's positive that things are being organized and being paced a little bit.
Yeah, I very much agree. And but there's another element to this which I think makes it exciting, and perhaps we've been focusing a little bit from the perspective of sponsors and developers. But there's another aspect which I think is very important, which is the downstream effects in terms of building a vibrant industry, much of which, of course, is Jordanian domestic industry. I was wondering, Hannah, if you could give us a sense of the volume of PV that you expect to see installed, for example, in 2015, so looking ahead 1 year, but also the effects on what could be available in terms of domestic services that could service that installation. For example, O&M services, engineering services. And of course, on the whether that is as a parts supplier or as a services supplier, or going up to the level of a fully wrapped EPC supplier.
Simon, I think you have mentioned it all, because all that is happening now in Jordan. As I mentioned earlier, when we started, we were only probably 2 or 3 companies talking about solar photovoltaic, but today you find around 400 companies doing a lot of things in the PV or in solar. We have even Philadelphia Solar in Jordan that's kind of assemble solar panels, and they have quite good capacity around, if I'm not mistaken, around 60 mega per year, something like that. And they have been shipping also, exporting to outside of Jordan, to the UK and other countries, and they have obtained all the certificates for their product. But also O&M will be playing, it's creating a lot of opportunity for a lot of companies, parts, components, structural engineering to build the structures and things like that, metal manufacturer for the structures, cabling, all these been impacted actually with the demand on solar PV and installation. Today, I think towards the end of this year, probably we'll have around 15 megawatt or something like that. Toward the end of next year, probably you'll have another 15. I think towards the end of next year, probably we'll have at least 30 megawatt installed in terms of distributed energy. But of course, toward next year, probably we'll have another 210 of utility scale. So it did create, or it's creating also a vibrant market for a lot of services, as I have mentioned, and And even the legal firms, they have benefited a lot out of these projects with all these contracts and to review and to agree on, and be it EPC contract or even the financial contracts at this stage with the financial closing. So there's a lot of benefit out of this, let's say, movement on solar in Jordan.
That's great. Actually, can I just ask a follow-up question as well? And this is a question that's come from the audience. Since this panel is made up of developers, investors, and installers, would you recommend purchasing locally manufactured modules? Is there incentive for you to do so? Is there perhaps a price incentive? And I think a related question that has to be considered is that would you find that lenders would be willing to lend to projects which are largely locally procured? Is that bankable?
I think yes, it is, and we have a clear case. Philadelphia, they have financed through a local bank a 10 mega in Jordan. So the product, it's bankable, and there is an incentive, I think 15% on the tariff for the local product, but we need to determine the percentage of the local input into the product in order to be able to obtain that 15%. So yes, there is incentive for local manufacturing here in Jordan, and it's been encouraged by the government, and definitely would recommend to buy local, but they have to compete also with other products that you get from China or from any other place in the world. It's an open market.
Shukri, a related point, of course, is the financing of the projects. If we're talking about round one, right now, 7 out of 10 projects are financed by the IFC, which is part of the World Bank Group. That's been part of the pattern for previous projects. I mentioned earlier in the show the Tafila wind farm, which was not just IFC, but other multilateral financiers as well. At the same time, though, there's a vibrant banking industry in Jordan, and a number of banks who are active in other infrastructure and very interested in solar. So I was wondering if you could talk just for a few moments about the future of financing in Jordan. Will it continue to be led largely by multilaterals, or do you see this transitioning to become more of a domestic and regional financing?
Well, as far as the IPPs are concerned, the large projects, I think syndication of local banks can play a role in that. The 10 megawatt project that was developed by Philadelphia Solar was entirely financed by a local bank. So there is appetite in the local market. It's just as project sizes get bigger, it becomes more difficult. So in the commercial sector, for project sizes between 1 to 5 million and also up to 10 million, you'll find local banks are interested in that, and they're primarily driven to take a facility from the Central Bank of Jordan, which allows them to lend at lower interest rates and at longer periods. There is a gap in the retail market, which unfortunately isn't being served by the long-term interest and the low interest rate loans, and a few banks are trying to develop this product either by introducing zero interest loans or by having the central bank facility be extended to smaller loan sizes. But unfortunately, that market is still not there, and solar projects can't take the burden very often of high interest rates. And then there is a leasing market as well. A few of our members in IDAMA are providing leasing products, which is also an interesting area, as well as the BOOT model is something that's quite desirable for commercial projects on the order of 1 to 5 million JDs. So there is also alternative methods of financing out there.
I wanted to ask you about that. In fact, you're involved with Shamsi, which is a community-scale distributed renewable energy project. That's at the household level. around the region, it's relatively unusual to have residential solar projects. A number of jurisdictions, such as Dubai and Abu Dhabi, are just now considering permitting rooftop solar applications at the residential level. And yet Jordan already has this. Could you just explain just a little bit further how residents finance these? And I think also let's look ahead a little bit to the way these are financed in many other countries where it's done through a rental scheme, so that the homeowner does not actually have to take out full financing, but actually leases the project. Do you see that market expanding in Jordan as well?
Yeah, I mean, there is a challenge in the residential market because 95% of the consumers are subsidized, and so renewables and solar photovoltaic doesn't make a lot of sense unless the subsidies are somehow transferred in some kind of mechanism to these owners, and that's something that the government's interested in doing, either through the Renewable Energy Efficiency Funds or some other donor programs. One of the challenges is to regulate and allow the utilities to provide loans and facilities by way of the electric metering bill, so that the consumer can pay back the investment through the utilities. And the government's about to introduce some measures for the utilities to have demand-side management programs take effect. So there are some potentials, but at the moment it's only the high consumers, essentially those that consume more than 1,000 kilowatt-hour per month that are paying high tariffs. They're self-financing most of the investments in solar, unless you're talking about thermal. But this is primarily photovoltaic. It's more self-financed at the moment.
Ines, I think one of the constraints that was alluded to earlier in Shukri's presentation at the beginning is the constraint on grid capacity. What are you hearing from Jordanian authorities on the plans to overcome grid capacity congestion issues? Do you see these as forming a bottleneck in the market?
We think that it's definitely becoming a bottleneck. Of course, it's location dependent, but when we talk about the wheeling law and the opportunity to connect in one location and provide to another location, because in such case you're talking about larger size projects, because land and space is not a constraint, then grid capacity is an issue. If you're talking about net metering and self-generation on site, we see it as less of an issue. Probably Hannah and Shukri can also comment on this as well.
That's very helpful. I think also I'd like to touch on something, as we are running a little short on time. Shukri, I think in terms of thinking about Jordan, you mentioned transparency earlier. Just how do you see in general the regulatory regime in Jordan? And I think we need to be careful to think about the whole range of this. It's not just getting a generation license and of course getting your tariff, but it's also land regulatory issues. It's issues with other permits. It's environmental issues. What is the general, painting a broad picture? How is that regulatory regime operated in Jordan? Is it user-friendly? Is it transparent? Do projects run into significant issues? And if they do, where are the largest ones? And then, sorry to follow up, but the next one, of course, is do you see changes or improvements?
Well, I think in terms of the regulatory framework, the Regulatory Commission, the Electricity and Regulatory Commission, which is now, it's taken on a broader mandate, has set very clear bylaws in relation to grid connection and permitting requirements. So, and that's very clear. If you follow the process, it's just a question of time and checking off the boxes. And the Regulatory Commission does play a supervisory function, and they do monitor the progress. And from that perspective, there are windows where you can go and complain and try and find out what's going on. And certainly connections help to find out what's going on. The challenge has been primarily in the past 3 years, the changes in the region. The initial intent of the law was to have direct proposals, but then the government came back and said, no, we want to have a competitive tendering process of expressions of interest. And so I think we're learning as we go along, and that's the main challenge. However, in terms of permitting, I believe it is, as long as you follow the bylaws, I think the procedures are quite clear, and there should be transparency in that. Now, there are opportunities to improve these procedures through dialogue, and that's something that IDAMA works hard on doing, because there are certainly ways of having shortcuts and less bureaucracy in these permitting processes. And that's something we seek to overcome.
That's great. Ines, I'd like to follow up with one other question. I think it's just to take a real step back here. One of the perceptions of Jordan is that it has benefited enormously in the solar sector because of its geographic position in an area of the world where a great deal of focus has been placed on developing solar. But it has neighbors who have announced major projects and then or major initiatives, and I'm talking primarily, of course, about Saudi Arabia, where the initiatives have not taken off as quickly as was imagined a couple of years ago, or at least as was envisaged a couple of years ago. In the meantime, Jordan has really powered ahead, and we've been hearing this over the last hour, and has really become an area with sectoral opportunities from the utility scale all the way down to the residential level, which is really quite remarkable for a small country with financial constraints. But what happens if a country like Saudi Arabia does expand its solar industry in the way that was described a couple of years, and I think it was 1.15 gigawatts was talked about. That's an enormous number, and it had a huge impact on the market at the time. If that kind of opportunity opens up, will the spotlight move from Jordan, or has Jordan established enough of a track record at this point to be self-sufficient and to keep going as an industry, regardless of what happens with other markets in the close neighborhood?
I think certainly Jordan has been fortunate in that it's the first mover in really solar PV IPPs. So by far with 12, 13 with Philadelphia, solar PV IPPs, Jordan's by far the first mover in the Arab region. And as a result, it's attracting a lot of attention today. And as a result, also there's a lot of experience being built by local players, whether they're developers like us or EPCs like our portfolio company, etc. Same with Kawar, same with Mustaqbal. We're building an experience base and going through the cycle on different parts of the value chain. So this is Saudi moving forward with their 40 gigawatt program or so, and the rest of the region moving forward, I think is only positive for Jordan in two ways. One, it'll decrease some of the interest in Jordan, so it makes it maybe less competitive for local players like us when there are fewer competitors chasing the same opportunities. And number two, where local players in Jordan have experience and references, because Jordan's a first mover, the Saudi market becomes a attractive export market, whether again it's for project development or O&M or EPC. So we see the fact that it wasn't that Jordan was fast, I think it was that everyone else was slower, and we were pressed to do so because of the local energy price, and we're reasonably fast, but I think it provides a great economic development opportunity and an industrial development opportunity. So when one looks at Jordan, it's not just for the local Jordanian solar PV market, it's really for a regional market, because the players here now have a local experience that is relevant let's say, 70% relevant in Saudi and other regional markets. So it's a great place for a hub.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, Shukri mentioned earlier exports to the European Union by Jordanian companies, and that's an extremely impressive track record to have for really quite a relatively young industry. And another statistic that I think was very impressive, at least to me, is that there are 400 companies involved with solar installations in Jordan. Again, a very impressive number. But Shukri, if I could just turn to you for a moment. In your presentation, you mentioned one of the core drivers economically, but also one of the challenges for Jordan, which is its current dependence on imported, particularly heavy fuel oil, and a deficit of $4 billion in 2014. Sorry, that's $4 billion. I'm not sure if that was dollars or JD, but in 2014. Do you see this constraint as, I mean, what is the path right now? Is it becoming an improved situation? Is the situation getting worse? Is solar helping at this point in time, or is it still too early?
Well, I think solar is helping. It's just a very, very small drop of in a large bucket. So we have much more that we can offer the government. And as Hanna mentioned, the challenge is that in a few years we're going to see additional sources of cheaper sources of fuel. We're going to see alternatives, and that's going to put a bit of pressure on the renewable energy sector. Having said this, though, that will affect mostly the IPP market, but it should not affect the net metering market, where electricity prices have been announced into the future for the next 3-4 years. Then we'll start to hit a grid capacity constraint issue rather than economics of solar. The economics will still be good. It's just that we might have a more difficult time in connecting. So I think it's a double-edged sword. I think there's a lot more we can do. It's just that in the future we're going to have to rely on other technologies and other approaches to overcome grid capacity constraints.
I think it's very important. Also, I think it's important to recognize that solar doesn't just contribute electricity power. Ines, you have experience with solar heating as well, and with other applications such as that. I was wondering if you could speak to that briefly.
Sure. I think what we saw on the solar thermal side, the solar heating side, is something that we will also see on the PV side, meaning because solar heating began being commercially viable in Jordan about 8-9 years ago. So we've had the fortune to be invested in one of the local players, Millennium Energy Industries, which has, based on references in Jordan, began about 5 years ago an aggressive expansion internationally, and today has about 80% of its revenue coming from Saudi Arabia and the UAE, but also has references as an EPC in Cyprus, in Chile, and is also now developing BOOT and finance projects in this area of large-scale solar thermal. So we can see the same happening on the PV side, where players obtaining references locally really are in a position to then begin working regionally and perhaps internationally. Whether, again, it's on the development side, the EPC side, the O&M side, etc., manufacturers across the value chain. So we look at this prospect as something very positive for the country, and a secondary benefit for any investor that comes to Jordan, whether they're an EPC, an O&M provider, or developer, that it really can help them outside of Jordan as well as in Jordan.
I think that's a great takeaway, and I think that really is, in a nutshell, what we've been talking about this entire hour. Jordan is developing a very vibrant solar industry. It's larger and more diverse than I think many people are aware that it is, and that is truly impressive. And in general, I think the panelists would agree with me that the picture we're seeing is a very optimistic one, with a solid future being developed based on a good track record that's already underway. I'd like to thank my panel. I think it's been a very interesting discussion. I'm sorry that we are very much out of time here. I think we could go on and discuss many more interesting things about this country, and I hope that this discussion will happen and continue outside of this webinar. But I'd like to thank my panel for their very interesting input. We've been listening to Shukri Halabi, who's a founding board member of IDAMA. We've also been listening to Hannah Zaghloul, who's the Chief Executive Officer at Kawa Energy, and also to Ines Rimawi, who's the Managing Director of Catalyst Private Equity, and also a developer of one of the projects in the Round 1 Solar direct bid process in Jordan. My name is Simon Stevens. I'm a lawyer with Chadbourne & Park. Jordan is a very important country to us and to our practice. And we know, of course, it is to all of you as well. And we'd like to thank you very much for your participation in this webinar. Thank you.
And on behalf of PB Insider, I'd like to thank Messier for organizing today's webinar and Simon for moderating today's proceedings. Once again, thank you to Shukri, Hannah and Enis for all their input throughout the webinar. As outlined earlier, we'll be sending you the recordings of today's session next week. Once again, thank you for joining us and have a great day. Thank you.